The dog was not trying to escape the drain. He was trying to go back for someone. At 2:17 in the morning, the storm had swallowed half of Savannah beneath rainwater and darkness. Streetlights flickered behind silver curtains of rain, their glow trembling across flooded pavement, while thunder rolled over the rooftops like something heavy moving through the sky. Staff Sergeant Caleb Ward stood knee-deep in rushing water beside an open storm drain, one hand gripping a rescue rope and the other locked beneath the chest of a German shepherd who should not have had the strength to fight him. The dog was soaked to the skin. Mud darkened his sable coat. His ribs rose beneath every strained breath, and one ear carried a small notch that caught the beam of Caleb's flashlight whenever he moved. Yet his amber eyes remained clear, alert, fixed on the black tunnel below. "Easy," Caleb whispered, tightening his hold as another surge of water pushed against his boots. "I've got you." The shepherd did not look at him. He stretched his neck toward the opening and released a low sound, not quite a whine and not quite a growl. Something hard rested between his jaws. Caleb had noticed it only after climbing down through the maintenance hatch and finding the dog pressed against an iron grate nearly 40 feet beneath the street. At first, he had thought it was a piece of pipe. Then lightning flashed above the drain, sending a pale shimmer down the tunnel, and Caleb saw the cracked lens, the bent clip, and the small red light still blinking through the rain. It was a police body camera. The dog held it as carefully as if it were alive. "You can let go now," Caleb said. He reached toward it. The shepherd's ears flattened, and his body stiffened in Caleb's arms. There was no threat in the movement, only refusal. Caleb stopped. He knew that kind of refusal. He had seen it in Marines who carried letters through dust and heat because a friend had asked them to. He had seen it in men who held onto a photograph long after the edges had worn white. Some things were not possessions. They were promises. Caleb shifted the dog higher against his chest and stepped back from the drain. Water ran from the shepherd's coat, streamed from Caleb's sleeves, and gathered around their boots before racing toward the curb. Behind them, the rescue truck's amber lights turned the rain gold for half a second at a time. The city felt empty, though somewhere beyond the storm a siren rose and faded. "We need to get you warm," Caleb said. The dog twisted suddenly. One paw struck Caleb's jacket, then another. Weak movements, but desperate. He tried to lower himself toward the street, toward the drain, toward the darkness he had nearly drowned inside. Caleb held him tighter. "No, you're done down there." The shepherd looked up at him for the first time. His eyes were not wild. They were pleading. Caleb felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the rain. He had spent 12 years learning the difference between fear and purpose. This dog was afraid, but fear was not what kept him fighting. He was trying to complete something. Caleb glanced toward the body camera. Its red light blinked once, paused, blinked again, still recording. "Who gave you that?" he asked. The shepherd's breath trembled around the device. A faded K9 patch clung to the harness beneath the mud. Most of the lettering had been scraped away, but Caleb could make out a single name stitched along the edge. "Atlas. Atlas," he said softly. The dog's ears lifted. There it was. Recognition. Not safety. Not yet. Just proof that the animal still belonged to a world above ground. A world with names, orders, partners, and doors that opened when someone came home. Caleb lowered him carefully onto the rear platform of the rescue truck. Atlas's legs folded beneath him, but his head remained raised. His gaze never left the storm drain. Caleb crouched beside him and noticed deep red clay packed between the straps of the harness. Savannah's flooded streets were mostly gray sand and black silt. Red clay came from farther inland, near the abandoned pumping stations and old freight warehouses west of the river. Atlas had not entered the drain here. He had traveled through it, perhaps for miles. Caleb touched the edge of the harness and found a second detail. A short length of nylon cord had been tied beneath the chest strap using a compact rescue knot, clean and deliberate. The body camera had not become tangled in the dog's gear. Someone had fastened it there. Atlas had torn it free and carried it in his mouth. A gust of wind shook the truck. The dog flinched, then forced himself upright. His paws slipped once on the wet metal. Caleb caught him before he fell. "Stay with me." Atlas pressed the camera against Caleb's wrist. For one quiet second, neither moved. Then the tiny speaker inside the cracked device came alive. Static hissed through the rain. A man's voice surfaced beneath it, faint and broken by water. Atlas, find someone. The recording clicked. Another sound followed. 3 slow knocks against metal. Then silence. Atlas turned toward the drain again. Caleb stared into the tunnel, where the black water moved beneath the city like a hidden road. He finally understood. The dog had not been trapped there by accident. He had been sent through the darkness, carrying the only thing someone could not afford to lose. And somewhere beneath the flooded streets, the person who trusted him was still waiting. 12 hours earlier, Savannah had not yet surrendered to the storm. The sky was the color of old pewter, heavy but unbroken, and a warm wind moved through the live oaks along East Broad Street, stirring curtains of Spanish moss above the sidewalks. Store owners taped their windows. City crews cleared branches from gutters. At the fire station near the river, volunteers stacked bottled water, blankets, and sandbags beneath fluorescent lights that hummed softly against the growing silence outside. Caleb Ward worked without speaking. At 38, he still carried the shape of a United States Marine in the set of his shoulders and the measured way he crossed a room. His brown hair was cut close, though not as sharply as it had been during active service, and a pale scar curved beneath his right ear, almost hidden unless the light caught it. His eyes were blue-gray and steady, but they rarely rested for long. They checked doors, windows, faces, and every sound that did not belong. Most people called that discipline. Caleb knew better. It was what remained. When a man had once ignored something small and spent years wishing he had listened, he lifted a case of emergency lanterns onto a shelf and felt the familiar pull in his left shoulder. The injury had healed. The memory had not. 6 years earlier, during his final deployment, a young Marine named Daniel Hayes had noticed a loose strip of fabric tied to a fence post beside an empty road. Daniel had said it looked wrong. Caleb had studied it for 3 seconds, decided the wind had placed it there, and ordered the team forward. Nothing terrible happened in that moment. That was what made the memory so difficult. The consequence came later, after the road turned, after the signal had already served its purpose, after Caleb realized that danger often announced itself quietly and waited for pride to dismiss it. Daniel survived, but he never returned to duty. Caleb visited him twice after coming home. The third visit never happened. Some apologies grew heavier each time they were postponed. "Ward," called a voice from the supply room. "You planning to move the whole building by yourself?" Caleb turned. Marcus Reed, the station coordinator, stood in the doorway holding 2 paper cups of coffee. He was nearing 60, with a silver mustache and the patient expression of a man who had spent half his life watching storms arrive and people pretend they were prepared. Caleb accepted 1 cup. "Forecast changed again. Rain starts before sundown. Worst of it after midnight. They are saying 8 inches before morning, maybe more near the river." Caleb looked toward the bay doors. Beyond the glass, the wind had begun pushing dry leaves along the pavement in tight circles. "Drainage crews ready? As ready as city budgets allow." Marcus took a sip, then studied him. "You can go home before it gets bad." "I am home." Marcus did not answer. He knew Caleb lived alone in a narrow brick house 10 minutes away, with 1 chair on the porch and no lights in the upstairs windows. He also knew the station had become the place Caleb stayed whenever silence followed him too closely. At 4:30 in the afternoon, they began checking low streets near the old freight district. Caleb drove the rescue truck west while the first drops appeared on the windshield, large and widely spaced, leaving dark coins on the dusty glass. Warehouses lined the road beside the river, their faded brick walls marked by decades of salt, heat, and neglect. Most had been converted into storage facilities or shipping offices. A few remained empty, with broken signs turning slowly above locked gates. Traffic moved east, away from the water. 1 vehicle moved west. It was a white police canine unit, clean enough to look out of place among the delivery trucks and utility vans. No emergency lights. No siren. Just steady speed toward the oldest section of the freight yard. Caleb slowed at the intersection as the vehicle crossed ahead of him. Through the windshield, he saw the driver only in profile, a uniformed officer with 1 hand high on the wheel. In the rear compartment sat a German shepherd. The dog was large, dark along the spine, with a sable chest and 1 ear marked by a small notch. For the briefest moment, the shepherd turned his head. His amber eyes met Caleb's through 2 layers of glass and 40 feet of rain-dimmed air. Caleb felt an unexpected stillness settle over him. The dog did not bark. He did not pace. He simply watched, calm and intent, until the vehicle passed behind a row of shipping containers. A green light appeared above Caleb. The truck behind him tapped its horn. He drove on. "You see something?" Marcus asked over the radio. Caleb lifted the microphone. "Nothing certain." The answer tasted familiar. He checked the side mirror, but the white vehicle was gone. By 5, the rain had strengthened. Water began gathering along curbs and shallow, fast-moving streams. Caleb inspected 3 clogged drains, moved a fallen branch from a narrow access road, and helped an elderly couple carry medicine and 2 frightened cats to a community shelter. Ordinary work. Necessary work. Still, the image of the shepherd returned each time Caleb paused. Those eyes had not held fear. They had held attention, the kind one trained soul recognized in another. Near sunset, he drove past the entrance to the freight yard again. The gate stood half open. Tire tracks crossed the red clay beyond it, already softening under the rain. A small metal sign identified the property as Pumping Station Number 7, closed for maintenance. Caleb reduced his speed. Deep inside the yard, between 2 dark warehouses, a white shape disappeared around a corner. Then the gate began to close. He almost stopped, almost turned in. But a call came through the radio about rising water near a retirement home on the south side, and duty pulled him forward. Caleb pressed the accelerator. In the rearview mirror, the gate sealed shut beneath the darkening sky. Somewhere behind it, too far away to be heard over the rain, a German shepherd was being given an order he would carry through the night. By 11:40 that night, the retirement home was secure, the last resident was inside the shelter, and the streets near the river had begun to disappear beneath fast-moving water. Caleb drove north with both hands steady on the wheel while the rescue truck pushed through 6 inches of rainwater. Wind bent the live oaks over the road. Loose branches scraped across rooftops. Every few seconds, lightning revealed porches, parked cars, and road signs standing alone in the gray flood. The radio carried overlapping reports of blocked intersections and failed pumps, but beneath the voices Caleb kept hearing another sound in his memory. Nothing certain. The words had followed him since the freight yard. He turned west without announcing it. Pumping Station Number 7 lay less than 2 miles away, beyond a row of dark warehouses and an underpass already filling with water. When Caleb reached the closed gate, the white canine vehicle was gone. Rain had softened the red clay into deep ruts that led toward the rear of the property, then vanished beneath a broad sheet of runoff. Caleb stepped from the truck and swept his flashlight across the fence. No movement. No officer. No dog. Only the metallic groan of the gate and the steady roar of water entering the storm system. He was about to call the location in when something struck metal beneath the street. 3 slow knocks. Caleb stopped. The rain hammered his hood and shoulders, but the sound came again. 3 knocks. A pause. Then 3 more. He followed it 50 yards along the fence to a drainage channel where brown water rushed toward a wide iron grate. At first, he saw nothing beyond it. Then 2 amber eyes opened in the darkness. "Easy," Caleb said, lowering himself beside the opening. The German shepherd stood chest deep in moving water on the other side of the bars. His sable coat clung to his body. A dark harness wrapped his shoulders, and something small and black hung from his mouth. He lifted it and tapped the grate again. 3 times. Caleb reached for the latch, but it had been secured with a maintenance chain. Water climbed around the dog's legs with every passing minute. Caleb returned to the truck, took a bolt cutter and a rescue rope, then called Marcus. "I have a canine trapped in the drainage tunnel west of Number 7. I am entering through the service access." Marcus answered immediately. "Caleb, that system feeds the river pumps. The water level is rising across the district." "I know. City crews are opening the overflow gates soon." Caleb looked at the dog. The shepherd had lowered his head against the current, protecting the object in his mouth. "Then I need to move now." The chain broke after the second cut. Caleb tied the rope around a concrete post, clipped the other end to his rescue belt, and pulled the grate open just far enough to enter. The tunnel was less than 5 feet high. Cold water struck above his knees and pressed hard against his legs. His flashlight revealed stained concrete, floating leaves, and a narrow ledge running along one wall. The shepherd backed away as Caleb approached. not from fear. He kept looking deeper into the tunnel, then returning his gaze to Caleb, as though measuring whether the man understood. "Come on," Caleb said. "We are getting out." The dog did not move. Caleb stepped closer. The shepherd raised the black object, showing it clearly for the first time. A cracked police body camera. A red light blinked beneath a layer of water. Caleb reached for the harness. The dog shifted away and nearly lost his footing. "All right, I am not taking it." Thunder vibrated through the concrete. Somewhere farther below, a heavy gate opened, and the current strengthened. Caleb removed the weathered dog tags from beneath his shirt. He held them out in his palm, letting the metal catch the flashlight beam. The shepherd stared at them. "I know what it means to carry something for someone," Caleb said. "You keep yours. I will keep mine." He placed the tags against his chest and lowered his hand. "Easy. I am not leaving you behind." The dog's ears lifted. His body softened by a fraction. Caleb slid one arm beneath his chest and another behind his legs. The shepherd allowed himself to be lifted, but the instant Caleb turned toward the exit, the dog twisted to look back into the tunnel. A faint sound traveled through the darkness. Not water, not thunder. Metal striking metal. Once, then silence. The shepherd pushed weakly against Caleb's shoulder, trying to return. Caleb felt the animal's heartbeat racing beneath his wet fur. "Someone is down there," he whispered. The dog pressed the camera against Caleb's wrist. Static crackled from its damaged speaker. Through the hiss came a man's voice, thin and distant. "Atlas, find someone." The recording ended. Caleb looked toward the black passage as water swirled around his thighs. The shepherd had done exactly what he had been told. He had crossed the flooded tunnel, found the grate, and made his own signal when no human could hear the one left behind. Caleb tightened his hold and began moving toward the opening. "We are coming back," he said. Atlas kept his eyes on the darkness, as if deciding whether one promise from a stranger could be enough. The nearest veterinary clinic with emergency power stood 3 miles east of the freight district, its windows glowing pale blue through the rain. Caleb carried Atlas inside just after midnight, leaving a trail of water across the tile, while the dog kept the cracked body camera secured between his jaws. A woman in navy scrubs hurried from the treatment room. Her name tag read Dr. Hannah Brooks. She was in her early 40s, with dark blonde hair tied back and the calm expression of someone who knew panic rarely helped the wounded. "Set him here," she said, guiding Caleb toward a padded examination table. Atlas resisted the moment his paws left Caleb's arms. His legs trembled, but he turned toward the clinic door, searching for the storm drain he could no longer see. "He wants to go back," Caleb said. Hannah placed a warm blanket over the dog and checked his breathing. Then someone gave him a reason. She examined his paws, chest, and eyes with careful hands. Atlas was cold, exhausted, and dehydrated, but she found no serious injury. His condition came from distance, exposure, and the stubborn refusal to stop moving. "He has been traveling for hours," Hannah said. "Probably farther than he should have survived in that water." Caleb looked at the red clay packed beneath the harness straps. "He came from number 7. The old pumping station? That is my best guess." Hannah reached toward the camera. Atlas tightened his jaw and released a warning sound deep in his chest. She stopped immediately. "That does not belong to him by accident." Caleb knelt beside the table. "Atlas." The shepherd's eyes moved to him. "We need to see what you carried out." Caleb removed his dog tags and placed them on the blanket between them. The metal gave a soft chime. Atlas watched the tags, then looked at the camera. Slowly, he opened his mouth. The device dropped into Caleb's palm. For the first time since the tunnel, Atlas lowered his head. Not in surrender, in trust. Hannah wrapped the camera in a clean towel and connected it to a charging cable at the counter. The red light flickered, faded, then returned. Water had damaged the casing, but the memory card remained sealed inside. "I might be able to recover part of it," she said. Before Caleb could answer, headlights swept across the clinic windows. A dark sport utility vehicle stopped beneath the awning. A man stepped out wearing a city police raincoat over a pressed uniform. He moved quickly, though not with the hurried uncertainty of someone who had just received bad news. He entered with his hat tucked beneath one arm and rain shining across polished black boots. "Staff Sergeant Ward?" he asked. Caleb rose. "That is me." The man extended a hand. "Captain Nolan Pierce, K-9 Unit Commander." His hair was silver at the temples, his posture precise, and his voice carried the practiced warmth of public ceremonies. I was told you recovered one of our dogs. Caleb looked toward Atlas. How were you told? Pierce paused only briefly. Emergency dispatch. The clinic reported the identification number on his harness. Hannah glanced at the telephone beside the computer. She had not touched it since Caleb arrived. Pierce crossed the room and softened his expression. Atlas, he said. The dog's head lifted. For one hopeful second, Caleb expected recognition. Instead, Atlas rose unsteadily and moved between Pierce and the counter where the camera lay. He did not bark. He did not lunge. He simply planted his paws and stared. Pierce stopped. He has been under stress. He knows you, Caleb said. Of course he does. His handler reports to me. Where is his handler? Pierce's expression tightened with something close to regret. Officer Benjamin Carter is missing. We believe he entered the freight district without authorization and removed evidence from an active investigation. His eyes shifted toward the towel on the counter. That camera is city property. I will take it with the dog. Atlas gave a low growl. Pierce looked down at him, and Caleb followed the dog's gaze. Atlas was not watching the captain's face. He was watching his boots. Thick red clay clung along the edges of both soles, fresh enough that rainwater had not washed it away. The same clay Caleb had found beneath Atlas's harness. Pierce noticed Caleb looking and moved 1 foot back. The freight yard is restricted, he said. You should not have been there. Caleb heard the old warning inside those words, quiet enough to be dismissed. This time, he did not dismiss it. Neither should you, he said. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Atlas stood beneath the cold clinic lights, exhausted but unwavering, guarding the camera from the man who had arrived before anyone called him. For several seconds, no one moved. Rain rattled against the clinic windows, the lights dimmed beneath a surge from the emergency generator, and Atlas remained between Captain Nolan Pierce and the towel-wrapped camera as if the entire room depended on the distance between them. Caleb watched Pierce's face, waiting for surprise, anger, anything honest. What he saw instead was calculation. The captain adjusted his raincoat and gave Hannah a restrained smile. Dr. Brooks, I understand your concern, but this is police evidence. Interfering with it could compromise an investigation. Hannah rested one hand beside the computer. I have not opened anything. I am trying to keep it from failing. Then stop trying. Atlas growled again, quieter this time. Pierce looked at the dog with an impatience that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. Caleb stepped closer to the examination table. You said Benjamin Carter stole evidence. That is what the preliminary report indicates. What evidence? Pierce's eyes shifted toward him. Internal records. Shipping documents. Medical inventory connected to the city relief program. Caleb remembered the old warehouses, the white canine vehicle, and the red clay under the captain's boots. And you went to the freight yard looking for him. I went where my duty required. Before the storm? Staff Sergeant Ward, you rescued a dog tonight. That was admirable. But this matter is beyond your role. Caleb had heard that tone before. Polite enough to sound reasonable. Firm enough to make questions feel like disobedience. Once, years ago, it might have worked. Atlas does not think so, he said. Pierce exhaled and reached inside his coat. Caleb's body tightened, but the captain withdrew only a leather identification case and placed it on the counter. Call headquarters. Verify who I am. Then hand over the dog and the camera. Hannah looked toward Caleb. He gave the smallest shake of his head. Before either could speak, the clinic telephone rang. Pierce turned toward the sound. Atlas moved at the same instant, not toward the captain, but toward the computer. He pressed his nose against the towel, then looked at Caleb. The damaged camera gave a faint electronic chirp. Hannah saw the indicator light change from red to green. The memory card is responding, she said. Pierce crossed the room. Do not play it. Why? Caleb asked. Because chain of custody matters. So does a missing officer. The telephone continued ringing until it stopped. Outside, another emergency vehicle passed without slowing, its lights washing blue across the walls. Hannah removed the memory card with a pair of small forceps and inserted it into an adapter. The computer hesitated. A folder appeared, disappeared, then returned with one damaged video file. Pierce's voice hardened. Dr. Brooks. Hannah selected the file. If it is corrupted, this may be our only chance. The screen filled with gray static. A timestamp flickered in the corner, showing 6:17 that evening. The picture steadied just enough to reveal the inside of a warehouse. Stacks of cardboard boxes rose beneath hanging lamps. Rain tapped against a metal roof. A man in a police jacket entered the frame. Benjamin Carter. He was younger than Caleb expected, perhaps 35, with dark hair, tired eyes, and the deliberate movements of someone working under pressure. He opened a shipping crate marked for emergency medical relief. Inside were sealed packages of insulin, antibiotic supplies, and portable heart monitors. Pierce pointed at the screen. There. He removed city property. Benjamin lifted several packages from the crate and placed them into a black bag. He checked the aisle, opened another container, and repeated the action. On the surface, it looked exactly as Pierce had described. A trusted officer stealing supplies while a storm closed in around the city. Caleb felt doubt enter the room like cold air beneath a door. Atlas watched the screen and whined. Pierce stepped toward the computer. You have seen enough. The video continued. Benjamin carried the black bag out of view, then returned with a small case. He knelt beside the open crate and removed several devices no larger than coins. One by one, he pressed them beneath the remaining packages. Hannah leaned closer. Tracking transmitters. Pierce said nothing. Benjamin looked directly toward the camera. Atlas, stay. His voice was low but clear. We need proof of where they take the next shipment. The picture shook as Atlas shifted beside him. Benjamin closed the crate, then opened a ledger resting on a nearby table. Names, dates, and delivery routes passed beneath his hand. He photographed each page. He was not stealing, Caleb said. He was replacing the missing inventory and marking what remained. Pierce reached for the adapter. Atlas stepped forward and blocked him. The captain stopped, his jaw tightening. On the screen, Benjamin suddenly turned toward a sound beyond the warehouse doors. The video blurred. A man's voice called his name from outside the frame. The recording jumped forward by several seconds. Benjamin moved quickly toward Atlas, fastened the camera beneath the dog's harness, and spoke close to the microphone. If I do not come back, find someone. Static swallowed the next words. Pierce reached again, but Hannah pulled the adapter free first. The screen went dark. Silence filled the clinic. Atlas touched his nose to the lower corner of the monitor, where the last frozen image had remained before disappearing. Caleb had noticed it too. Reflected in the polished side of a metal cabinet was the edge of a man's uniform, a silver command bar, and a pair of black boots stained with red clay. The reflection did not show a face. It did not need to. Caleb looked down at Pierce's boots. Atlas did the same. Then the captain's radio crackled beneath his coat, and a voice announced that pumping station number 7 would begin an emergency water release in 47 minutes. The announcement from Captain Nolan Pierce's radio changed the room. 47 minutes. That was how long remained before thousands of gallons of storm water would be redirected through the tunnels beneath pumping station number 7. Pierce lowered the volume and reached for the memory card again. The release is automatic, he said. No one should be anywhere near that system. Caleb stepped between him and the counter. Then you should be helping us find Benjamin Carter. Carter abandoned procedure. Whatever happened after that was his responsibility. Atlas raised his head at the sound of Benjamin's name. His exhaustion seemed to fall away for one sharp instant. He stared at Pierce, then at the dark computer screen, and pressed one paw against the edge of the table. Hannah inserted the memory card again before Pierce could stop her. There may be more audio, she said. The video file was damaged, but the soundtrack might have survived separately. Pierce moved toward the door. I am calling this in. Do that, Caleb said. Tell them a missing officer may be trapped inside a flood system scheduled to open in less than an hour. Pierce paused beneath the cold light. For the first time, the confidence in his face weakened. It was not fear. It was the look of a man watching time move beyond his control. He stepped outside into the rain and lifted his radio. Hannah opened an audio recovery program while Caleb stood beside Atlas. Static poured from the computer speakers, thick and uneven, followed by the hollow echo of footsteps inside the warehouse. Benjamin's breathing came through next. Fast, controlled, close to the microphone. Then his voice. 7, 4, East. A burst of interference swallowed several seconds. 3, 1, lower. Hannah replayed it. The same broken numbers returned. Could be a badge number, she said, or a file reference. Caleb listened again. The rhythm pulled at an old memory. During training, coordinates were often spoken in separated groups when radio signals were poor. The speaker slowed each number, leaving space so nothing would be mistaken. Those are directions, Caleb said. He is not identifying evidence. He is telling Atlas where he is. Hannah replayed the clip a third time. Benjamin's voice surfaced beneath the static. 7, 4, East Access. 3, 1, Lower Chamber. Caleb looked toward the rain-streaked window. Pumping station number 7 had several maintenance entrances, but he had seen a faded number painted near the freight yard gate earlier that evening. 74. Access Tunnel 74, he said. Lower Chamber 31. Atlas stood. His legs trembled beneath him, but his ears pointed forward. When Caleb repeated the numbers, the shepherd stepped down from the examination table and went directly to the clinic door. Hannah caught the loose blanket before it fell from his back. He understands the location. Pierce returned before Caleb could answer. Water ran from his coat, and the muscles along his jaw had tightened. Headquarters is sending a unit to collect the evidence. You will remain here. How long until they arrive? Caleb asked. Road conditions are slowing everyone. How long? Pierce did not answer. The emergency radio on Hannah's desk came alive with a city warning. Pump crews had moved the release forward. 34 minutes remained. Atlas scratched once at the door. Pierce reached for the dog's harness. Atlas moved behind Caleb and held still. He is coming with me, Caleb said. Absolutely not. He knows the tunnels. He is city property. Caleb looked down at the shepherd, at the worn patch on his harness and the mud still trapped beneath the straps. No, he is a partner trying to get back to his officer. Pierce's expression hardened. You do not understand what is inside that station. Then tell me. Silence followed. Rainwater tapped against the glass like impatient fingers. Hannah removed the memory card and placed it inside a sealed medical evidence pouch. I already sent a copy of the recovered file to Detective Rachel Monroe, she said. Pierce turned toward her. You had no authority to do that. She is the night supervisor for major crimes. She called after the clinic line stopped ringing. She heard enough to start asking questions. Red and blue lights appeared beyond the windows. A sedan pulled beneath the awning, and a woman in a dark raincoat stepped out. Detective Rachel Monroe entered with water shining on her shoulders and a city map folded beneath one arm. She was tall, composed, and carried the tired focus of someone who had spent the night separating emergencies from lies. She looked first at Pierce, then at Caleb, then at Atlas waiting beside the door. The city records show Benjamin Carter requested an investigation into missing relief shipments 3 weeks ago, she said. Captain Pierce closed the request the next morning. Pierce's face became very still. Rachel unfolded the map across the counter. Access Tunnel 74 leads beneath the western warehouse. Lower Chamber 31 is an old manual control room. It was sealed 5 years ago, but there is a maintenance passage from the storm drain. Atlas placed his nose against the exact point on the map. Rachel looked at him, and something in her expression softened. He has been there. The radio announced 29 minutes. Caleb clipped a fresh rescue line to his belt and opened the clinic door. Cold rain swept inside. Atlas stepped into it without hesitation. Rachel followed, carrying the map and the evidence pouch. Pierce remained beneath the fluorescent lights as the three of them crossed toward the waiting vehicles. Then Atlas stopped. He turned back and stared at the captain through the open doorway. He did not growl. He simply watched until Pierce looked away. Caleb understood the warning. The dog was not only leading them toward Benjamin. He was showing them exactly who should not follow. The rescue truck reached the western freight yard with 23 minutes remaining before the emergency release. Rain struck the windshield so hard that the warehouse lights beyond the fence appeared to float in the darkness. Caleb stopped beside Access Tunnel 74, where a rusted steel door stood half-hidden behind vines and stacked wooden pallets. Atlas was on his feet before the engine went silent. His body still carried the weakness of the night, but purpose held him upright. Detective Rachel Monroe opened the passenger door and checked the map beneath the glow of her flashlight. The lower chamber is roughly 600 feet in, she said. The old plans show 2 service corridors, but one was sealed after the last flood. Caleb clipped a second rescue line to Atlas's harness. He will know which one. Rachel looked at the shepherd. Then we trust him. The steel door resisted until Caleb leaned his shoulder against it. When it opened, damp air rolled from the passage carrying the smell of wet concrete, rust, and river mud. Atlas stepped inside without waiting. His paws moved softly over the narrow walkway, while water rushed through a channel several feet below. Caleb followed with one hand on the line. Rachel came behind him, holding the map in a waterproof sleeve and reporting their location through her radio. The signal weakened with every turn. At the first junction, the left corridor descended toward the main pumping system. The right corridor climbed beneath the warehouse. Atlas stopped between them. He lowered his nose, breathed once, then chose the left path. That leads closer to the release gates, Rachel said. And to lower chamber 31, Caleb replied. The tunnel narrowed until the walls nearly touched his shoulders. Emergency lamps mounted along the ceiling flickered in weak intervals, leaving long stretches of darkness between circles of yellow light. Atlas moved through them like a shadow, pausing every few yards to listen. Somewhere ahead, metal struck metal. One faint knock. Atlas froze. His ears rose. Caleb held his breath. Another knock came through the tunnel, weaker than the first. Atlas pulled forward. "Benjamin," Rachel called. Her voice traveled along the concrete and returned as a hollow echo. No answer followed. The radio at her shoulder crackled. 18 minutes, she said. They reached a flooded stairwell descending beneath a sign marked Level 3. Water covered the first 4 steps and climbed slowly higher. Atlas entered until it touched his chest, then stopped. He looked toward a narrow maintenance ledge running along the wall. Caleb tested it with his boot. Barely 10 inches wide, but solid. "We use the ledge." He lifted Atlas carefully, setting the dog's front paws against the concrete shelf. The shepherd balanced, moved 3 steps, then waited for Caleb. Rachel followed slowly, one hand against the wall. Below them, the dark water accelerated toward the main channel. Halfway across, the emergency lights went out. The tunnel disappeared. Only the sound remained. Water. Breathing. The faint scrape of Atlas's claws against concrete. Caleb switched on the small lamp attached to his vest. Its beam cut through the darkness and found Atlas staring at a blank wall 20 feet ahead. "That is not on the map," Rachel said. The corridor ended at a smooth concrete barrier with no visible door. Atlas reached it and pressed his ear against the floor. A soft knock answered from the other side. Then 2 more. Caleb crouched and ran his hand along the base of the wall. Cold air moved through a thin seam near the floor. "It is a concealed service panel." Rachel found a faded metal plate beneath layers of paint. The handle had been removed, but 4 bolts remained. Caleb took a compact wrench from his rescue kit. "How much time?" 14 minutes. He loosened the first bolt. Atlas lay beside the seam, his nose almost touching it. A voice came faintly through the concrete. "Atlas." The shepherd's entire body changed. His tail struck the floor once. He released a low, trembling whine and pushed his paw beneath the narrow gap. "Benjamin," Caleb called. "My name is Caleb Ward. Detective Monroe is with me. We are opening the panel." The reply came broken, but clear enough. "Control room. Manual lock. Water rising." Caleb removed the last bolt. The panel shifted forward less than an inch before catching against something inside. Rachel placed both hands beside his. Together they pulled until a stack of empty supply crates slid away from the opening. Warm, stale air escaped. Behind the panel was a small chamber lit by a single red emergency bulb. Benjamin Carter sat beside an old control console with water around his boots and a radio that no longer worked. He looked exhausted, but when Atlas entered, his face softened as if dawn had reached the room before the sun. The shepherd crossed the shallow water and placed his head against Benjamin's chest. Benjamin closed both arms around him. No command, no praise, just one breath shared between partners who had kept the same promise from opposite sides of the dark. Rachel stepped toward the console. "Can you stop the release?" Benjamin looked at the gauges. "Not from here." Captain Pierce disabled the main controls and sealed the outer gate. Caleb noticed a red lever beneath a glass cover on the far wall. "What about that?" "Emergency diversion valve," Benjamin said. "It redirects the flood channel, but the mechanism needs 2 controls opened at the same time. One is here. The other is in the upper station." Rachel checked her radio. Only static answered. 9 minutes. Atlas lifted his head and looked toward a narrow ventilation passage above the console. Benjamin followed his gaze. "There is another way to the upper station." he said, "but it is too small for any of us." Caleb looked at Atlas. The dog was tired, soaked, and still breathing harder than he should. Yet he had already risen. Somewhere above them, a mechanical alarm began to sound. 8 minutes remained, and once again the only path toward the truth was just wide enough for 4 paws. 7 minutes remained. The ventilation passage opened above the control console, a narrow steel channel barely 2 feet high, lined with dust, cables, and the cold breath of moving air. Benjamin Carter placed one hand on Atlas's harness and looked into the dog's amber eyes. "Upper station," he said softly. "Find the red wheel." Atlas listened without moving. Benjamin touched the side of his neck, then pointed toward the dark opening. "Go." The shepherd climbed onto the console and disappeared into the passage. His claws made a faint rhythm against the metal, growing softer until even that sound was swallowed by the alarm. Caleb watched the opening for 1 second longer, then turned toward the emergency diversion lever. "Tell me what has to happen." Benjamin steadied himself against the console. "When Atlas reaches the upper room, he needs to press the floor switch beside the red wheel. That releases the safety lock. At the same moment, we pull this lever." Rachel studied the gauges. "And if he cannot find it?" Benjamin looked toward the passage. "He will." Above them, Atlas moved through darkness filled with unfamiliar scents. Rainwater, machine oil, rust, and beneath them all, the trace he remembered from training. Benjamin's hand on a painted wheel. Benjamin's voice saying red. The passage turned sharply and rose toward a grated opening. Atlas pushed against it with his nose. It did not move. He backed up, gathered what remained of his strength, and pressed forward again. The grate lifted just enough for him to crawl into the upper control room. Emergency lights flashed red across silent machinery. The room was empty except for rows of pipes, a large one mounted on the wall, and a square pressure plate set into the floor beside it. Atlas crossed the room, but before he could reach the plate, a side door opened. Captain Nolan Pierce stepped inside. His raincoat was gone. Water darkened the shoulders of his uniform, and red clay marked his boots. He stopped when he saw Atlas. For a moment, neither moved. "Come here," Pierce said. Atlas lowered his head. "You are finished running." The dog did not growl. He looked past Pierce toward the floor switch. Pierce followed his gaze and understood. He stepped between Atlas and the pressure plate. Below, the timer reached 5 minutes. Rachel's radio suddenly found a weak signal. A dispatcher's voice broke through the static, reporting that police units had entered the freight yard. Rachel pressed the microphone close. "Send them to the upper control building. Captain Pierce is inside." Benjamin looked at her. "How do you know?" "His vehicle passed our rescue truck near the outer gate." Caleb gripped the emergency lever. "He followed us." In the upper room, Pierce took one slow step toward Atlas. "Carter broke the rules," he said, as though the dog could be persuaded by explanation. "He threatened an operation that took years to build." Atlas remained still. Those shipments were being redirected. No one was supposed to notice. Another step. "You were trained to obey." Atlas's ears lifted at the word. Obey. He remembered Benjamin's voice in the warehouse. Find someone. He remembered cold water, darkness, and the stranger who had entered the tunnel instead of walking away. Training had taught Atlas commands. Loyalty had taught him which voices deserved to be followed. The alarm changed pitch. For minutes, Pierce reached for the handle on Atlas's harness. The shepherd moved aside, quick but controlled, circling behind a row of pipes. Pierce turned with him. Atlas moved again, drawing him farther from the pressure plate. Below, Benjamin heard the faint scrape of paws through the ceiling. He is moving around the room. Caleb looked at the timer. 3 minutes. Rachel held her radio toward the ceiling. Units are at the building. A heavy knock sounded through the upper door. Captain Pierce, step away from the control system. Pierce glanced toward the entrance. That single moment was enough. Atlas crossed the open floor and placed both front paws on the pressure plate. A green light appeared above the red wheel. Down in the lower chamber, the safety lock released with a deep metallic click. Now, Benjamin said. Caleb and Rachel pulled the emergency lever together. It resisted at first, then moved downward with a long mechanical groan. Far beyond the walls, gates shifted inside the flooded system. The roar of water changed direction, turning away from the lower chamber and toward an empty, overflow basin beside the river. The gauges settled out of the red zone. The timer stopped at 1 minute and 42 seconds. For a breath, no one spoke. Then Rachel's radio confirmed that officers had entered the upper room and secured Pierce without incident. Atlas remained on the pressure plate until Benjamin's voice came through an old wall speaker. "Good boy, come back to me." Minutes later, Atlas emerged from the ventilation passage and lowered himself into Benjamin's waiting arms. Above them, investigators opened the freight warehouse. The tracking devices Benjamin had planted led them to sealed trucks filled with relief supplies that had never reached hospitals, shelters, or veterans centers. Delivery records connected the missing shipments to Pierce and a private contractor named Wesley Grant. Hannah's recovered video had already been copied beyond anyone's reach. The truth no longer depended on one damaged camera. Caleb looked at Atlas resting against his partner. The dog had crossed floodwater, carried evidence, found help, and returned to the place where someone still needed him. Not because he understood the crime, because he understood a promise. Outside, the storm began to weaken, and the first thin edge of morning appeared beyond the warehouse roofs. 3 weeks later, the storm drains of Savannah carried only the quiet sound of ordinary rain. The flooded streets had dried, the freight yard had reopened under federal supervision, and the relief supplies recovered from the warehouse had finally reached the hospitals, shelters, and veterans centers that had been waiting for them. Captain Nolan Pierce and Wesley Grant were formally charged with theft, falsifying public records, obstructing an investigation, and unlawfully confining Officer Benjamin Carter. The city held press conferences. Reporters spoke about accountability. Officials promised reforms. Caleb Ward watched none of it. He had learned that justice often arrived with too much noise, while healing came softly and asked for no audience. Benjamin spent 11 days in the hospital recovering from exhaustion, dehydration, and the strain of being trapped inside the lower chamber. Atlas refused to leave the hospital entrance during the first night. He lay beneath the covered walkway with his head on his paws, watching every set of sliding doors open and close. The nurses brought him water. Hannah Brooks brought a blanket. Caleb sat beside him until sunrise. Neither of them slept. When Benjamin was finally strong enough to walk outside, Atlas rose before the doors fully opened. The shepherd did not bark or rush forward. He crossed the pavement slowly, as though afraid the moment might disappear if he moved too quickly. Benjamin knelt with some difficulty and opened his arms. Atlas pressed his head beneath Benjamin's chin and stood perfectly still. People nearby turned away to give them privacy. Caleb understood why. Some reunions were too sacred to be watched closely. In the weeks that followed, Benjamin began physical therapy and gave testimony to investigators. Atlas remained beside him whenever the hospital allowed it, but the canine unit placed the dog on temporary medical leave. Benjamin's apartment had 3 flights of stairs, and his doctor warned that recovery would take time. The department asked Caleb whether he could care for Atlas until Benjamin was ready. Caleb said yes before the question was finished. Atlas moved into the narrow brick house with 1 chair on the porch and no lights upstairs. On the first evening, he inspected every room, checked each window, and settled beside the front door. Caleb placed a clean bowl of water near the kitchen and an old blanket beside the fireplace. Atlas ignored the blanket. When Caleb went upstairs, the dog followed. When Caleb sat on the edge of the bed and removed his boots, Atlas lay on the floor beside him. The house did not feel empty that night. It breathed. A month after the storm, Caleb drove Atlas back to the intersection near the freight district where they had first seen each other through the windows of 2 passing vehicles. The sky was clear, and late afternoon sunlight rested on the live oaks. City workers had replaced the damaged grate and painted the curb with fresh yellow lines. The entrance to pumping station number 7 was secured behind a new gate. Nothing about the place looked remarkable. That was how darkness often survived, Caleb thought. It learned to hide inside ordinary things. Atlas walked to the storm drain and stopped. His ears moved toward the faint rush of water below. Caleb waited several feet behind him. He did not call the dog back. Atlas lowered his nose to the metal, breathed once, then turned away. The choice was small, almost invisible, but Caleb felt its weight. The dog had carried his duty into that darkness. He no longer needed to carry the darkness with him. Back at the house, Caleb opened a small wooden box that had once held medals from his years in the Marine Corps. He removed his worn dog tags and the old identification tag from Atlas's damaged harness. The metal surface of the canine tag still bore scratches from the tunnel. Caleb hung both sets on a wooden hook beside the front door. They touched with a soft, clear sound. Atlas looked up from the rug. "Different uniforms," Caleb said. "Same promise." The shepherd crossed the room and sat beside him. Caleb rested one hand between his ears. For years, he had believed his greatest failure was the warning he had missed. He had carried it like a sentence, certain that one mistake had defined the man he would always be. Atlas had shown him something different. Listening could begin again. Trust could begin again. A person did not honor the past by remaining trapped inside it. Later that evening, Benjamin called. His voice was stronger. He said the doctors expected him to return home soon, though active duty would have to wait. Caleb placed the telephone on speaker. The moment Atlas heard Benjamin's voice, his tail struck the floor. Benjamin laughed softly. "Tell him I am coming back." Caleb looked at the dog. He already knows. Outside, a gentle rain began tapping against the porch roof. Atlas moved to the window, watched it for a moment, then returned to Caleb's side. He did not search for a tunnel. He did not listen for metal knocking beneath the street. He simply lay down and closed his eyes. The damaged camera was now sealed inside an evidence room. The stolen supplies had reached the people who needed them. The crime had been exposed, and the men responsible would face the law. Yet the quietest truth remained inside that little house. One wounded man had listened when a dog asked for help. One faithful dog had trusted a stranger when hope was almost gone. Neither had saved the other alone. They had simply refused to leave while someone was still waiting in the dark.